I'm Mike Govoni, and for the last 15 years, I've been in recovery from addiction and on the deepest quest to find healing, to experience my own unique wholeness beyond the story of what happened to me. By taking an integrative, holistic approach to experience transformation, I bring you the Healing Beyond Recovery podcast, a show dedicated to people in recovery who are looking for deeper healing and transformation. Hey guys, I'm excited to be bringing you this conversation on today's episode with a special guest who I had the pleasure of sharing the virtual stage with on the Stress Elimination Summit. Arlina Allen's talk on how to overcome low self-esteem was amazing, and I think it's a topic so many of us in the recovery community struggle with at some point along our journey. Just be aware, we get a little woo-woo on this episode as we discuss how to overcome limiting beliefs through accessing our subconscious mind, the law of attraction, and healing the relationship with our inner child to live our best life in recovery. Arlina is no rookie on this path. She's been in recovery for over 26 years and has had to overcome her own battle with low self-esteem and searching for happiness in all the wrong places. Thinking happiness would come if she only made more money, had a better body, found Mr. Right, led her to doing her own deeper work and find her now passion helping others to discover the same. Arlina is a life and recovery coach. She's the founder of the Sober Life School and the host of the award-winning podcast, the ODAT Chat podcast. ODAT stands for One Day at a Time. She has been sober since 1994, happily married for 23 years, and the mother of two amazing boys. Her class, Reinvent How to Build Self-Esteem and End Self-Sabotage, is being taught to those who suffered with low self-esteem, codependency, workaholism, and many more issues. It is also being taught in the California and Arizona prison systems to help provide healthy coping skills to inmates before they are released. Arlina says, "We only allow into our lives what we feel we deserve, consciously or unconsciously. You can change what you believe and create the life of your dreams. Change your mind, change your life." Without further ado, Arlina, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
I'm so glad you're here. And I think we first met by sharing the virtual stage of the Stress Elimination Summit with good friend Tim Ringgold. And it was really a pleasure just to meet you. And I know I did a little recording on your podcast. And your topic of self-esteem is really important because so many people in the recovery community, including myself, dealt with self-esteem issues for so long. So I really appreciate the work you're doing. And before we get into kind of the meat and potatoes of self-esteem and how to work with that, I'd like for you to share a little bit about your own personal journey from addiction to recovery and how you got into your life's work supporting others now, I think specifically women, to heal the issue of self-esteem and to live their best life in recovery.
Sure. So I started my recovery journey. I always start at the beginning, right? I feel like I don't want to go too far back, but I think learning about your family of origin is really important because I think that's where it all begins, right? And my parents did not have any addiction issues at all, but I did not really grow up with a lot of coping skills. My daddy's from Kentucky. He comes from a long line of teachers and preachers, so there was a lot of praise Jesus in my house.
And mine too.
Yeah. Oh, that's right. Yeah, we really have that in common, right? We were super churched growing up, as a friend of mine said. Super churched, yeah. And my mom is from Mexico City, so she was the first foreign exchange student at a high school in Klamath Falls, Oregon. Sorry, excuse me one sec. So my mom came to this country and got her education, and she eventually met my dad, and they married. And after 8 dates, can you imagine?
Wow, 8 days and they were married?
Dates, like they
dated. 8 dates. Okay.
Yeah, they dated 8 times and were married. And I guess back in the day that was not uncommon. I don't know. But anyway, my parents are super nice people. My dad was like a government guy. He worked at places like Lockheed and NASA, and he called it an outfit, this place called FMC, where they built the Bradley tanks. And he was like a former Marine. So he's kind of like a a no nonsense guy, super religious. Mom was not so much religious, but anyway, that kind of tells you a little bit about my parents. They're just super nice, middle class, Americans. But there was a couple of things that happened to me in my childhood that really changed who I thought I was. And one was that I was sexually abused by a neighbor. And then the other was my parents' divorce.
Mm.
And so those two events really changed my self-esteem. It changed, it really sort of burned into my psyche, into my subconscious. My beliefs about who I was, what I deserved, and my place in this world, what I was capable of. And the messages that I got growing up is that I wasn't good enough, that I was bad, all these really negative things. And, I didn't really choose my beliefs. I've come to understand that a belief is an idea that's repeated over and over again and then accepted into your subconscious mind as true. Beliefs don't necessarily need to be rooted in truth. But I grew up with this belief that I was just not good enough and that I was bad. And before long, I turned to things like drugs and alcohol at a really early age. It was between 8 and 10, which I have still to this day. I'm 52 years old and I still have a hard time believing that my little girl felt the need to do that. But I was under a lot of, I was suffering with a lot of sadness, really. And I was looking for something to fix me. And then my mom went out on a date, and I have an older sister. She and I were left home alone. And I went for this bottle of booze for some reason in the cabinet. This isn't like learned behavior. I'm not quite sure where I got the idea that this would be fun or a good thing to do. But I tell you, Mike, I remember the first time I took a sip of alcohol, it burned my lips. It burned all the way down. And then when it hit bottom, that warmth spread through my entire body. And I didn't realize how bad I felt until I had the contrast of feeling really good. And the juxtaposition of those two feelings was burned into my memory forever. And I chased that feeling. That was the feeling that I chased. It was the removal in the absence of self-hatred, self-consciousness, guilt, shame, fear. All of that was removed. And I felt really good. And I have since obviously learned healthier coping skills, but that went on for a very long time. And it went on until I was about 25 years old, when I just couldn't do it anymore. And I met some people that were in recovery, and they kind of ushered me into 12-step rooms, and that began my recovery journey.
Yeah, beautiful. And thank you for sharing with me and the audience, the depth of your story and what happened. And, my big take on addiction is it's the root of it is trauma. And what you experienced was for sure traumatizing. And yet when you found that elixir, let's just call it, it warmed up everything inside and probably took some of that underlying discomfort away, whatever may have been there. And then, yeah, it takes some of us a long time to find that road, but you found it fairly young, just as I did. And I'm just curious, did you get sober in a 12-step fellowship or?
I did. Yeah. I was 25 years old. I was an outside sales position, and two of my customers were in the program. And, we became friends, and I was sharing stories of what was going on in my life. And, they started sharing things about recovery with me, things like the definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. This guy said, you keep doing what you're doing, you're going to keep getting what you're getting. It's just cause and effect. It's not personal. But if you want different results, you need to start taking different actions. And the truth of the matter is I wanted to quit every time so my core motivation was to find love and make a lot of money. I believed that I bought into the fairy tales that, they tell little girls that you need a man, and he needs to be rich or you need to find that money your damn self. So I thought that those two things would fix me. And so I was always trying, I was in a sales job, and I was always trying to find the money and the man. And those things were not fixing me. But it was so funny. Every time I did like a goal setting workshop, the number one thing to do was always to quit drinking and smoking weed. Smoking weed was my get down.
So it was kind of there in black and white. You just weren't paying attention.
I couldn't do it. I really wanted to quit smoking and drinking, but I couldn't. And I lived at the self-help section in Barnes and Noble. I was like, oh, the answer to my problem is I need six-pack abs. I need the servant spiritual laws to money. I need, men are from Mars, women are from Venus. I was trying to solve the wrong problem. I was trying to solve the superficial problems of romance, finance, and fitness, right? I was thinking if I had those things, I was looking for external things to fill the internal void so that I could be happy and have peace.
Oh, totally. I totally relate to that, even from a guy's perspective. I was in the gym twice a day. I was chasing the ladies. I know I was reading your website a little bit. You talk about if it was in blue jeans or whatever the case may be.
A bottle, a bag, or blue jeans, I was doing it.
Yeah, you were chasing it. And I can relate so much. And I think, it's so common for so many of us until we get to this underlying issue, the beliefs, the trauma, things of that nature, we habitually just keep searching for the stuff outside of ourselves. And I think it's really great to get your perspective as a woman, because obviously I can give mine as a man, but we did some of the similar things. And I'm just curious, what was kind of your turning point? I know you got sober, but what was your turning point to understand, okay, it's not in the bag, the bottle, the blue jeans, and what was kind of like that bottom for you?
So I just operated from that place of I was just doing the best that I could, and I was trying to solve the wrong problems, but I continued to self-sabotage, or I kept failing. And finally I hit the wall and had to surrender. I had to accept that if I had the answer, I would have done it already, right? But I didn't have it. And so I had to come to that place of I just bottomed out. I was just like, I cannot do it my way anymore. All my bright ideas got me to this place of I stood at the abyss, right? And I had two choices. I didn't think I was going to survive. I mean, because while the drugs and alcohol allowed me to survive my teenage years, especially, it was my savior had become my executioner. Like I knew it was killing me. And I was afraid I was going to kill somebody else because I would drink and drive. And I just couldn't do it anymore. And then these guys were like, hey, come over here, come to these meetings. And that's when everything started to change, right? I did the surrender. I had given up on religion because I had been begging God my entire life to fix me. God, change me, fix me, and he never did. I was still human, still am. But I don't know. I don't know what I expected. I thought I could stop being bad, but that was the problem, is that I believed I was bad. And so at some point I realized it was never about the drugs, the alcohol, the men, because that was really my other addiction, love addiction, not necessarily sex addiction, but like the fantasizing and romanticizing and really just, I would meet somebody and just try to hang all my hopes on this person. Are you a fit? Are you the guy? Are you the Ken doll that I've been looking for my whole life? Are you Prince Charming? And I just was confused about what the problem was. And when I got into recovery, they talked about the inside job, right? And that was the first time I came across some like Tony Robbins stuff and Course of Miracles. All of a sudden, when I was ready, when I was just, Pema Chandran wrote this book, When Things Fall Apart. And the idea is that when you feel like things are falling apart, it may be that they're falling together, right? It's like we have to let go of the things that we're clinging onto that are not serving us any longer. And I just didn't know what to do. So when I broke, I was wide open for solutions. And that's when I learned that the healing had to come from inside out. And that's when I started learning about the subconscious mind and how so I teach a class, it's called Reinvent. And the premise is that we only allow into our lives what we believe we deserve on a subconscious level, and I can share a little bit about, how the mind works. Cause I think it's so cool that we live in an age, Mike, where science and spirituality are finding common ground. Like science is,
Yeah.
science is explaining why spirituality works.
Totally. Yeah. And I think it's so fascinating too that you came from a family of religion and you asked God for help, and you kind of quit that a little bit. And then you came to, the realization that, wow, like this is an inside job. And yeah, I definitely want to get into your take and your approach to really uncovering what's in that subconscious. So for the listeners, maybe like, oh yeah, my subconscious. Maybe we'll just talk a little bit about the subconscious and then how to access it and the beliefs that may be there. And I know this is a loaded question. And what are some steps we can begin to take to work with those so it's not affecting our conscious life?
Yes. Keep me focused on the solution part, because I do want to kind of explain the mechanics behind it first. But I do want, by the end of this conversation, I want people to just walk away with some practical things, actions that they can take right away.
Awesome.
So I tend to, I'm like a kite. I'll fly over the place. So you be my grounding string, right?
All right.
Okay, so this is how it works. So I'm going to talk a little bit about neuroscience for a second. So your brain has what's called a default mode network, and it works like a thermostat. We don't get too high, we don't get too low. We sort of live in this comfort zone. And this comfort zone is established in childhood in the way that we think. It's our subconscious mind becomes programmed in our childhood. We don't actually choose our beliefs. Our beliefs are typically given to us by our parents. And sometimes they give us messages that we then translate into the negative. Like the brain has a negativity bias, meaning that we tend to focus more on the negative than the positive. And the reason that happens is because your primordial brain, from caveman era, we needed to learn how to respond to danger, right? We needed to learn how to survive. So our brains are designed to focus on negativity. So the childhood coping skills that we learn, like survival, like disassociation or detachment from our feelings, those help us survive in childhood because we're not in control of our environment. They don't translate to healthy adulthood. Those survival skills of detachment cause us to look for things outside ourselves so that we can feel good on the inside. We use relationships, shopping, drugs, sex, achievement, workaholism, all that stuff. You name it, right? The purpose of addiction is distraction. Is to distract us from the feelings that we don't want to feel. It's how we maintain this disassociated feelings, and we numb out, we shut down, we don't develop, and we develop unhealthy coping skills, right? We still need to feel good and feel good about ourselves and live in the world. So we use drugs and alcohol, and we just develop all these addictions. So what ends up happening is that we develop what's called the default mode network. And the default mode network is a collection of neurons, brain cells, that are connected, that are wired together. And there's this saying that the neurons that fire together, wire together. And what that means is that these neural pathways like you've seen deer trails, right? The more thoughts are like the deers, right? You have a thought, it goes over the path, and the path becomes the groove, and the path becomes deeper and deeper. Same thing with your default mode network. These groupings of brain cells are together. And so these are their negative thought patterns. And what happens is when they fire together, it's electricity. They fire off and trigger things like serotonin or dopamine or cortisol, the stress hormone that release in your body. And then, so you have a thought, which triggers a feeling, right? And then we've made decisions about who we are in the world and everything. They trigger feelings. And then you make decisions based on what you know, and then you take actions, and then we go into cause and effect, right? These are cause and effect is just like a law, right? It's just cause and effect. You take an action, you get a result. So what happens is that we develop these negative thought patterns that lead to a consistent negative feelings and thoughts that lead to consistent actions, right? And there was a really interesting study done where the scientists showed that there are 60 to 80,000 thoughts per day. And 80% of those thoughts are negative and 95 are repeated every day. So it's virtually Groundhog Day, right?
Yeah.
Like you keep thinking what you've been thinking and you keep getting what you're getting, right? And if we roll it all the way back, if we peel it all the way back, it starts with your subconscious belief system, right? If you don't feel like, I used to have an issue with relationships. In my drinking career, I was attracted to men that were unavailable, right? And that way, if I was attracted to, it was a subconscious belief that I couldn't really have true intimacy. I couldn't let somebody really see who I was because I felt like I was bad, right? So I picked people that were unavailable so that there was no risk of me ever really facing true intimacy and somebody that I liked seeing who I really was because I believed I was bad.
Yeah, and what you're saying, I believe, is unconscious. That's a deeply rooted thing. So for the listeners, if you identify with that, there's no shame. It's just that, these patterns Arlina is talking about are deep rooted in the unconscious, subcortical, below the cortex up front. And I think what I'm having a little insight here with talking to is the default mode network is associated with self. So that would imply or really validate the rumination of the negativity around self-esteem. The default mode network builds a sense of self. And we've talked about this before. We won't get into it in depth, but psychedelic therapy actually helps us bypass the default mode network and open up to other possibilities and ways of seeing. So can meditation, so can other practices you may be sharing with us today. But I think that's so beautiful and really important that, what you're talking about, so they can understand the neurobiology and neurochemistry of what's happening to them. And it's not your fault. It's things that happened.
Yeah. Yeah. I actually just finished a presentation that I'll be recording. And that's really the transition point, is that it's not your fault. You did not choose your beliefs. We have confirmation bias. We have all these subconscious belief systems. But what's interesting is that we also have neuroplasticity. And neuroplasticity, Dr. Andrew Huberman is a professor at Stanford who talks a lot about neuroplasticity and brain science. He's a neuroscientist and professor. But what he talked about is that we can actually rewire our brains. And when we talk about rewiring, these default mode networks can be changed because neuroplasticity refers to the pruning and reinforcing of these neural pathways, right? So if you don't use something often enough, it prunes away. Your brain will prune, and it happens during night, at nighttime when you sleep, during rest or the REM sleep. That's why people in recovery need to be sober before they really embark on the 12 steps or whatever recovery path, because they don't really get good rest at night. The alcohol is actually very disruptive to sleep. So that's just a reason why not to practice abstinence so that your brain can rewire to a positive default mode network. But what's so interesting is with the practices that I do in class, that we begin to also leverage law of attraction, which is when you talk about it at the foundation level, it's what we're really talking about is what you think about, you bring about. It's like the self-fulfilling prophecy. It's like karma. It's Einstein talks about, think about the frequency of the life that you want to live, like match that frequency. He's like, it's not philosophy, it's physics. And the reason that it's physics is when we talk about this default mode network, we're talking about electrical currents, thoughts, and all these things. It's actually electricity. Like everything is made up of energy, right? Positive and negative energy. That's like every physical thing that you see is actually mostly space, but it's all molecules held together by positive and negative energy. And the law of attraction says that whatever you think about and feel about, your feelings is what carries the energy. That's what you attract, right? And so when we start to start thinking about what you do want, not what you don't want, that's when you start feeling the feelings and start making different decisions, and then the outcomes start to change in your favor. You're already using the law of attraction. You're just not using it in a way that supports you.
So what if you have a listener here that's like, yeah, I've tried to think so many positive thoughts and nothing's coming in, and I'm feeling rather stuck, and where can they begin to start with shifting their vibration, if we may say, and begin to explore what's in that subconscious, so they can begin to take the steps in the direction that they want to go and begin to attract the life that they want to live and have it kind of be here in the material?
So there's a few things that we can do. The biggest blocks to receiving abundance, positivity, anything along that realm, there's three things. It's guilt, shame, and fear, right? So we need a process to resolve guilt and shame and to really mitigate fear. Tim Ferriss is besides you, one of my favorite podcasters.
Thank you.
You're welcome. He has a TED Talk where he talks about doing a fear setting exercise as opposed to a goal setting exercise. And the fear setting exercise is, just take 5 minutes and write down all the things that you're afraid of, right? And then, like, what's the worst possible outcome? And then he says to write a plan, like a contingency plan for all those things, right? You write a contingency plan. So not only are you there's something magical about writing it down. I had a friend tell me once that you have a BS filter in your elbow. When you write, all the truth comes out. And it's so interesting. There's something so magical about writing it down like a pen and paper, right? You get it out of your head and onto paper, and you see it in black and white. Right. And so you get all your fears down on paper and it gets it out of your head. Just that act in itself can be very freeing. But then if you take it one step further and say, well, what is the contingency plan? If this worst thing happens, what is the plan to mitigate that? Right. So it's a very pragmatic, practical way of actually dealing with your fears, confronting them head on and dealing with them. And then you're free. Right. And there's all kinds of things that we can do about guilt and shame. In my class that I teach, we have something called the forgiveness process. And I highly recommend, if you're listening and you have a pen and paper, I highly recommend that you write a letter. You write a letter to your little 4-year-old, 6-year-old self, right? You write them a letter and you tell, like, we've had to abandon ourselves to really, that's what the disassociation is about.
To survive.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
But as conscious adults, we can choose to be present for our inner child. And I know that sounds kind of woo-woo, but there is that little person still lives inside you, and they need your support and attention and resources because now we're grown. The funny thing is, Mike, is that we make decisions about ourselves when we're children, and that's like letting a child decide how you're going to run your life. It doesn't make any sense consciously. Right. But that's what we do. We make decisions about who we are and what we're capable of when we don't have any information or context or resources. Right. We make the decision a long time ago. And so what we're doing is when you write that letter to your little self, you apologize. You say, sorry, I'm so sorry I abandoned you. I'm here now. I'm resourceful. I'm going to provide the nurturing and care that you needed. And I keep a picture of myself on my desk. I know nobody's going to see this, but I have it right here on my desk. I'm showing you this little picture of my little 4-year-old self at the stove that's cooking. But I keep that picture on my desk to remind myself that she's still in there and that she needs my attention and support, like on a day-to-day basis. Right.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And if you find a good practitioner or coach like Arlina, who actually deals with addressing the wounded inner child. And once again, you might be, for the listeners, you might be like, well, where's she going with this, law of attraction, inner child? It's all connected. The neurobiology in the fight, flight, or freeze, mode, say you're in sympathetic, or you're in, another branch of the nervous system, which is called dorsal shut down, those subcortical reactions are a result from the trauma that we experienced. And if you're listening and you're in recovery, I say this with compassion, but you've probably experienced more trauma than normal people, no fault of your own. It's just what happened. And hence why we went to drugs and alcohol. Now, I think it's beautiful, Arlina's wrapping it all up and saying we need to look at the neurobiology. We need to look at the actual neurons that are wired together and begin to find other ways of creating new pathways to step into new action. And by addressing that part of us that doesn't want to take the action, which is typically the younger part of us that's afraid. Now, I'll get really vulnerable for a moment. I have a little boy in me that's afraid to show up in business. And I have to remind this guy, like, dude, you're 37. You have done so much work and you are totally worthy and you have so much to help. You can help other people. You have so much to offer. And I have to remind him. But once again, we're making that I'm making that unconscious conscious in that moment. And that's what Arlina is talking about, is we have to begin to look at these underpinning beliefs, which is awesome. It's beautiful. Now, I'm just curious, how do we continue building these new pathways? Because you can be like, okay, I'm going to do this. And they can set something, they can write this down, they can do it once, and then, it just shows up again. So I imagine this isn't a one and done deal. How do we keep going on this path?
So, yeah. So when I do the class, the first thing I do, when I do the reinvent class, we're really reinventing your whole self-esteem, right? Your whole image of yourself. We're reinventing, rewiring, all that stuff. The first thing I do is I have people get clear on their why. Like, what is your internal why? Like Simon Sinek had a great presentation, did a TED talk about what is your why? What's the inner core reason for motivation? And so we go through the process. We do the 5 whys. Like, what is it that you want? And why, when you identify what it is that you want, you answer the question, because that will allow me to, it's something that you couldn't do without it. And then that will allow me to, you do it 5 times until you get to your core why. And we all have the same core why. We want freedom. We want peace. We want all the, we want to make contributions. We want to have lives that have purpose and meaning. Right? It all comes down to those are typically the core whys, right? Contribution to family and community and things like that. So you get to what your why is, right? Because I have people identify that first, because what you were saying about, because what's required is a daily practice of self-care. You wouldn't go to the gym once and stay in shape forever, right?
Exactly.
Like, that's ridiculous. Yes. That's ridiculous. I'm developing a membership site called the Brainwashers Club that's going to launch in April. And the idea is that it's like going to the gym. It's like your self-care, your self-esteem. Once you do all the work to raise your level of self-esteem, you sort of need to continue to nurture it. Like, you wouldn't water a plant once and think it was going to continue to grow, right?
Yeah. Like, you don't stay clean on yesterday's shower.
Yeah, right. Mm-hmm. Exactly. So we have to just surrender and accept that it's an ongoing process, right? That's the spoiler alert. It's an ongoing process. But I start with a why, your core motivation for why change is important, right? And why now? And then I have them do what's called the new vision. So have them do a perfect day exercise. This is somebody that they can do this. This is another great exercise to do is your perfect day. And your perfect day with like no limitations. And it's so interesting. I don't know if this is the same for men. Women have a hard time allowing themselves to want what they want, right? There's so much guilt and shame associated with wanting money, with wanting the love of your life, with wanting a good physical body. But women, I don't know if it's true for men, but it's like, I've done this class so many times, and women have such a hard time wanting what they want, like letting themselves want that. But that's part of the process that we do in class, is we help them get clarity on what it is they really want. And the truth of the matter is that most people are especially people who suffer addiction, we've practiced disassociation for so long that we have all these feelings that we don't really have names for. It's like the old school switchboard operator. There's like a wall of holes, and then the operator has all these plugs. And I liken those to feelings. It's like we're sitting there with all these plugs, all these feelings, and we don't know what hole they go in. We're like, what? I'm feeling some kind of way. I don't even know what it is. But we have to reconnect to our own feelings so that we can be really honest, really, about what it is that we want. Like, we have to reconnect to our feelings so that we can start exploring things like, what brings you joy? Man, I can't tell you how many people, like, especially when they get sober, they don't even know how to have fun anymore. It's like their dopamine reward system is so tied to the drugs and the alcohol. Like, boredom is a real thing when people first get sober, right? And so it's important to learn how to experience joy and have fun without drugs and alcohol.
Totally. And also, looking from a trauma lens, the basically the opposite of trauma, if you want to heal it, is to play. And we have such a difficult time. Like, I remember the first time I went to like an ICIPA, Young People's Conference of A, whatever that stands for, and I was like dancing, and it was like so awkward, and I was like, oh shit, this is weird.
This is weird. Yeah. Sober. Oh my God. My first sober dance, I was like a robot. I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. And I love dancing, but I just had so much self-consciousness, such self-centeredness that I couldn't let loose. And that's the funny thing about sobriety, is I showed up completely self-centered, but incapable of self-examination. But that's a whole nother story. But going back to the process, like, we get clear on the why, and then what it is that you want, and we do some work around how to get that clarity, and identify what it is that you really want. And then we develop a self-care practice. I have my girls do what's called these Reinvent journal pages. And the idea is that when you identify what it is that you want, you feel the feelings as if it's already happened. So the journaling prompt is something like, I am so grateful and happy now that I got the job, I have the money, I have the relationship, I have the fitness level. We have to start using visualization, right? Visualization and techniques help you to feel the feelings. Like, that's why vision boards were so popular. They're really powerful. I know some people kind of dismiss them, but like, I have one in my line of sight. My subconscious mind is always,
Yeah, and subconscious it works through symbolisms, symbols, things of that nature. So, yeah, of course. And we're getting into like metaphysics, the quantum, right? You can, if you can feel it and match it, you can create it. So I love this.
Oh my God, quantum physics is my favorite. I'm such a nerd. So Netflix has this special, I don't even remember what it was called, but they talked about the theory of, so Einstein had this theory called spooky action from a distance. And you can look it up on Google, spooky action from a distance. What he's really talking about is this quantum theory of entanglement.
Oh, yeah.
Right. And so you and I both have had experiences where you think about somebody and then all of a sudden they call, right? And I don't know who thought of who first, but in quantum physics, they talk about particles that can separate, but they're virtually like in physical space apart, but having effect on each other from a distance, right? And so this really interesting Netflix documentary was on the quantum theory of entanglement. And so this is like where science is meeting spirituality, because we know, like, what you think about, you bring about, those kinds of karma, tithing. Tithing is about whatever you give comes back to you tenfold. A lot of traditions have these law of attraction ideas. So it's just kind of interesting. But even Albert Einstein talked about, like, everything is energy. And so you're really attracting, like, we are like magnets. Our bodies are made up of positive and negative energy. And we are like magnets attracting to ourselves and repelling at the level of thought and feeling. So when I do these exercises in the classes, we get clear on what it is that you want. We write as if it's already happened. So you're visualizing, you're feeling it on a consistent basis. And the reason I start with what is your why, because on the day that you feel like skipping your self-care practice is the day you remember your why. And that is your internal motivation to do the self-care practice, because you're rewiring your brain so that you can have a better life. And it's not just a selfish motive. We affect everybody around us. A lot of what people's why is they want to like be an example for their kids. Your kids are watching you. Like, people don't do what you say, they do what you do. We teach by example. And so a lot of times what's interesting about the self-esteem class, it's like they get it conceptually. Oh, okay, I need to raise the level of my self-esteem, but then they don't feel good enough to like spend the money on themselves. So often what I do is I'll say you can bring a friend free, so that gets them over the hump. Like, they'll do it for their friend, right? But they also get the benefit.
Yeah. So they have a tough time doing it for themselves in the beginning, so they can do it for a friend. And then it's kind of, over time, is the friend a part of them? Is it like is that what you're doing with them? Or is it just a friend?
Because I don't know if it works the same, but like, women don't even go to the bathroom by themselves. Like, we're raised to do things in community, right? Probably out of, ancient tribes, right? The men were the hunters and gatherers, and the women stayed home with the babies, and they had to help each other, right? And so we're just hardwired to do things together. So it's so interesting. Someone with low self-esteem needs to raise it, but they don't feel like they deserve it, so they don't do it. Right? So bring a friend free is something that helps them get over the hump, because we will do for others what we won't do for ourselves. We put everybody else first. I don't think that's a woman thing either, but we do tend to put everybody else first, and we serve ourselves last. We have to flip that paradigm. We have to do the self-care first. It's like putting the oxygen mask on yourself in an airplane. You have to have the oxygen mask on first before you put it on your child, right? It's like a thoroughbred. You wouldn't expect a thoroughbred to run without feeding it first, right? So it's like we have to do the self-care first if we expect to produce.
Absolutely. That's so powerful. And I was just listening yesterday to a seminar with Dr. Gabor Mate, and he was explaining one of the reasons why people develop chronic illness as a result of trauma is because they've learned that coping mechanism to put others first. And by continuing to put others first, they have neglected themselves. And I think it's great what you're saying is what's that quote I had? It's not selfish to put self first. And I think
selfish. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think even in 12 steps, we can get that kind of inkling or message that it's selfish, but it's not selfish to take care of yourself first. In fact, if the plane goes down, or is going down, or it loses cabin pressure, how can you help the other person when you have no oxygen? So it's like, yes, this is awesome what you're saying.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's and to just add on to that idea about these the coping skills that we learn, the survival skills that we learn as kids, we learn to disassociate from our own needs because our needs are met by the caregiver, right? The adult. And so we learn that we have to, and if they're dysfunctional, then they don't want to hear a whining child, right? And so we learn that we need to make the adult happy so that they give us what we need. Right? We learn to shut off our own needs, wants, and feelings to please the person that has control over our life, right? But then you grow up and those coping skills don't work in adulthood because a healthy adult relationship, let's just say a romantic relationship, you have to be in touch with your needs and what you want in order to be able to communicate and set boundaries, like do boundary shaping, which is another really important, this is one of the 6 classes is boundary setting. And there's 2 kinds. There's brick wall boundaries, which is really more about safety and relationship ending. And then there's relationship shaping. So that's, communicating and negotiating your needs with somebody else, right? Because they have needs too. So we need to allow, we express our feelings, we allow them to have a feeling about what we just shared, right? And time to process and whatever. But it's a negotiation. But first, we have to be honest about what we want and need. And I'll just give you a little practical example. So, my husband is also in recovery. We got, I think we met in 94 and got married in 97. So it's been a minute. So, but what I learned is that I need to tell him what it is that I need from him. I need to learn to ask for what I need. So he was raised with women and in this healthy household, sort of, where he got the message that you're not supposed to fix a woman. Like if she brings you her problems, your job is to listen and not offer to fix, because women just want to be heard, right? That's, women need to be heard and have their feelings validated, and then we can move to solution. I can't just go into solution. I need to feel like somebody.
Process. Yeah.
Yeah. I think we all need our feelings validated before we can move on. But how it played out in our relationship is that, so now what I do is I go to him and say, I'm going to vent at you. Are you free? And he's like, yes. I need to vent at you for a few minutes. At the end, when I stop talking, what I need is a poor baby and a hug. And he's like, okay. He's like a deer in the headlights. And so I go into my thing. I go, oh my God, my day is, they're so mean to me. I struggled so hard and these people are assholes or whatever. And then he waits for me to stop. I'm just venting, right? I don't need solution. I'm just venting. I just need to, you and I have learned that we need to speak. We need to acknowledge, we have to say it out loud, right? So I vent, and then I pause and I wait. And he waits for me to finish and he looks at me and I go, poor baby. And he goes, oh, poor baby. That must have been so hard for you. And he gives me a big hug and everybody's happy and we get on with our lives. That's how we do it.
That's awesome. Yeah. The fact that you guys can communicate at that level and just kind of just have that, it's kind of like a drama. Like you share it, he participates and gives it you what you need, and you go on. That's really
we do
great.
This little dance, and it's funny. So now, and it's so funny because he is so conditioned to not providing feedback. I have to ask for it. Otherwise, I feel like I'm talking to a damn plant. I'm like, can you give me? You got any insight? Hello. He's just so afraid to do it wrong and fix me. But I actually like getting feedback.
Yeah, and it just shows like he's probably in touch with a very younger part of himself in that moment from when he was a child. So this is what we're kind of talking about, back to the subconscious, is he's just going along with that, pattern. What's beautiful. Yeah. What's beautiful is Arlina, has this conscious relationship at this moment in her partnership where she's like, dude, like, I know that worked for you in the past, but like, you're not a plant. Speak to me.
Yeah. I need some feedback. Otherwise I just feel like super vulnerable. And then he like moves on and I'm just like, oh my God. I feel awful. I've had other friends that don't provide any feedback. And it just, I feel shitty when I'm like, did you even hear me? You know what I mean? It's like, if your friend doesn't give you at least 2 follow-up questions, I feel like you're not even listening. But anyway, that's just kind of how we do it. But it's so important that, like, in relationship, we have healthy boundaries with others, but we also have to have healthy boundaries with ourselves. Like what I see with a lot of women, this idea of giving with strings, like we give and give and give and give and hope that we eventually get something back. But if we are giving beyond our ability to give without resentment, then that's crossing a boundary, right? And the funny thing about boundaries is that as you grow and evolve, which we're all doing all the time, we're all evolving. The funny thing is that sometimes we don't know where our boundaries are until we cross them, right? And that shows up in the form of some kind of pressure, right? Like, I don't feel good, like something's not right here. But we then need to be able to, analyze that and process it and then ask. So it's when setting a boundary, you state a hardship and then ask for what you need.
Mm.
So the hardship is like, gosh, honey, it's really hard for me to feel safe if I bare my soul to you and you don't have any feedback for me. It makes me feel like you're not, or I'm not even really sure that you're listening, and I just feel terrible. Could you provide me some feedback? Can you give me a poor baby and a hug at the end of this? I ask for what I need. And so that's training him how to treat me, right? We teach people how to treat us. So that's where the boundaries come in. And then we talked about the guilt and shame and forgiveness. We do this in the class. I call it the forgiveness process. We all go around and I'm like, what are your crimes? What are your thought crimes, real crimes? Like, what are you judging yourself for? And they give them a few minutes in class to write it all down. And then everybody shares. And the only thing you're allowed to say at the end when somebody shares is, thank you so much for sharing that. And they say, thank you for listening. There's no judgment. There's no advice. It's just acknowledgement to let you get it off your chest. Right.
Yeah. Beautiful.
Yeah.
And is this, I'm just curious, I believe after reading your site, you work specifically with women, right?
I do. So far, I've just been so trained and conditioned in the 12-step community. I've been involved for almost 27 years. And so I'm so conditioned that the women work with the women. And I occasionally will have a man reach out to me and ask me to take him through this process. But right now I just do a women's group. I could definitely do this one-on-one with somebody. But it just costs more, right? Because I can do one-to-many in group settings.
Yeah.
I feel like the guys need this too, but I'm not a guy. So what do you think?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I have this, similar work and experience with clients. I work with men and women, but yes, men need it too. It shows up in different ways for men, but I think it's wonderful what you're doing now that we're having this, chat, and you're going into, in depth what you do. It's fantastic. And I know I could have used this work early in recovery and, later in recovery. And I know there's women out there who are listening that could really benefit and really need you. So as we wind down here, Arlina, I know you have a Sober Life School, you have an ODAT podcast chat or ODAT chat podcast. What's ODAT stand for?
Chat, yeah. ODAT stands for One Day at a Time. I did not think it through when I named the podcast. I just named it after my favorite meeting, which meant every day at 6 a.m. I was, man, we were hardcore. Like, if you're willing to show up at 6 a.m. every day, like, it filters out a lot of the BS, right? So
Sure.
People who are serious about recovery. So I named it after that, but probably going to change it to just One Day at a Time at some point. So
but right now you can find it as ODAT, ADAAT chat podcast, right?
ODAAT, yeah.
All right. And as we wind things down, let's just let the listeners know maybe where they can find you and how they can learn more about you and your programs, that sort of thing.
Yeah, so you could either go to arlinaallen.com or you can go to Sober Life School. Sober Life School really is the hub of everything that has the podcast, the classes, the one-on-one coaching. It has some about me. It lists all the other podcasts and speaking engagements that I've done. I've been doing corporate gigs, which are super cool because this is information that mainstream, not everybody suffers from drug and alcohol addiction, but everybody suffers from something, right? So, and really in my mind, self-esteem should be like the number one priority because everything comes from that subconscious belief system of what it is that I deserve. Right. So, it's look around your room. That is the water seeks its own level. Right. So what you see on the outside is a reflection of what you believe you deserve on the inside. So if you don't like what you see on the outside, it's time to make your self-esteem a priority to raise that level. For sure. Making your self-esteem a priority. That's really powerful. And Arlina, I just want to say, thank you for everything you've been through to get you to this point. And thank you for the beautiful work that you do. And thank you for being a guest on the Healing Beyond Recovery podcast today. Well, thank you so much for what you're doing. And thank you for allowing me to spend some time with you. And I look forward to seeing you again soon.
For sure. Be well.
Be well.
I want to thank you for listening to today's episode, and if you liked what you heard and it was helpful, please remember to share the episode with a friend. Also, stay tuned for the release of episode 21 on the Healing Beyond Recovery podcast with special guest Rhonda Nelson. Rhonda is a clinical psychologist and part of Gabor Mate's team of facilitators teaching his work of compassionate inquiry. I'm super excited to learn more about compassionate inquiry since Gabor is the man and is truly a pioneer in the field of addiction, recovery, and healing. Rhonda will also be sharing her personal story of healing from the trauma that caused chronic illness using plant medicine ayahuasca and how it led her to do the psychedelic integration work that she does today. I first met Rhonda as she was a guest speaker for the Salt City Psychedelic Therapy Training Program, a program I attended that taught psychedelic education and how to help others with psychedelic integration support. This work is so transformative. I want to make sure it gets to your ears from a trusted practitioner like Rhonda that is doing amazing work in this field today. I think the topic of healing using psychedelic medicine is super valuable and is going to be a primary means of healing from addiction and trauma in the future. More on that in some time as I'm going to release my solo episode of doing my first journey with MDMA therapy to heal from trauma in my life in recovery. And once again, I want to thank you for listening to today's show. And remember, you can heal no matter what your story may be.